Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. My name is Greg. This is my first season. We have a very, very special guest today. She is, get ready for this, an author, a blogger, motivational speaker. She's a marathoner, an ultra runner, and podcast host. She's the host of her own podcast, the two-time award-winning Tough Girl podcast, where she interviews inspirational female explorers, adventurers, athletes, and everyday women who have overcome great challenges. Her podcast is listened to in 174 countries around the world and has passed 1 million downloads. Most impressively, and for me, because I've always had a fascination with this race, she completed the grueling Marathon des Sables in April 2016, which is the equivalent to running 6 marathons in 6 days across the unforgiving Saharan desert. This race is often called the toughest foot race in the world, so I'm hoping she can tell me all about this. She also has a book based on this race called Tough Girl Sahara Challenge, which you can find as Amazon. And don't worry, I'll be posting all the links to our YouTube channel and everything else. So without further ado, please help me welcome Miss Sarah Williams. Hi, Sarah. How are you?
Oh, I'm fantastic. Thank you. Although a little bit, I always feel super embarrassed when like introductions are done. I'm just like I think it's a very British thing to be really like cringy and like, oh no, stop talking. but I'm very well. Thank you. Yeah, very good.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. So thanks again for coming on and sharing your story. My listeners are going to love your story. We usually start off with a bit of an origin story. And I read in your book that growing up, you weren't much of a runner. You didn't think much of it, correct?
Correct. I don't think I used to do running as part of like, sports for fitness. So I used to play like hockey and used to play lacrosse. But when I played those sports, I'd sort of like hang around the goal. So I didn't really have to do that much running, but I could shoot and get all the glory. So yeah, not a massive amount of running sort of growing up. I mean, obviously we had to do cross country, but that was more of a forced experience where you're sent out wearing not very many clothes and it's the middle of winter and it's cold and you've just got to run a couple of miles. But in those days, it seemed like an horrendous distance to run. So yeah, it wasn't until sort of leaving university when I got sort of more into running and I started doing a half marathon with my sister. We did the Liverpool half marathon, but then I ended up moving down to London and fitness and exercise sort of went out of the window when I started sort of my proper corporate job and started working sort of all hours that was possible. And then I only really got into running, I'd say a couple of years later, and it was during the summertime and I'd actually run out of money and it was on the Monday and I wasn't going to be paid until Friday and I had food and my rent was paid and everything was good, but I had no money for transport. And this was like, well, how am I going to get to work? And I only sort of live like maybe 3 miles from the office, an hour. And I thought, well, why don't I run? And so that's literally how I got back into running. I started to run to and from work for that week. Really enjoyed it, was super productive. It was a great way of getting to the office before everybody else, showering, changing, starting work. And then when you run home, you end up de-stressing and feeling super relaxed when you're at home. And then I just sort of continued with my running journey. And then I signed up to do the London Marathon that year. And then I ended up running London Marathon every year for 5 years. And it's just sort of gradually evolved. And, you mentioned the Marathon des Sables. So I ended up doing that in 2016, which was, a little bit further than a marathon, a little bit more challenging due to the desert conditions and the heat and the sunshine and obviously running multiple marathons back to back, carrying everything you need on your back. So that's a little bit of an origin story of how my running started.
Did your coworkers at the time, were they envious of you or did they think you were crazy for running to and from work every day?
A little bit of a mix. A few people obviously thought I was a little bit crazy, but there were quite a few other runners there who sort of got it and understood it. But it was just a great way to actually start the day. You wake up, you're in your running kit, you run for 27 30 minutes or so, you get to the office, you have your shower, and I don't know, you get obviously that endorphin hit, and you already feel really productive because you've already achieved, you've already done your exercise. And so for me, it was just a really great way to start the day, and a great way to finish. And so I mean, I was very fortunate, at the offices, we did have all the facilities, so it was easy to shower and change, and I had like a hairdryer and hair straighteners there, and I was able to keep like all my footwear and quite a bit of clothing there as well. So it was relatively easy to do. It wasn't that you're running and then not being able to shower or anything. But yeah, especially during the summer months, it was absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah, winter running. Okay, so I'm from Montreal, so the only thing I hate about winter running is all the layers you have to put on and take off. So do you mind that, or it doesn't bother you putting on layers?
Does it? I think the UK is probably it's not probably that cold. Maybe like our winters, I don't think are quite as extreme as yours. And so even running during, I'm just trying to remember if I ran during the winter months. I probably did a little bit, but I'm definitely more of a sunshine person and a heat person than a cold person. So yeah, I think as long as you've got like a good waterproof jacket, some nice gloves to wear, and know that you can get warm and dry whenever you get somewhere, it's absolutely fine.
Now, before I get into the Marathon des Sables, because of you have so many accomplishments, I just want my listeners to know you also have a master's, okay, in women and gender studies from Lancaster University. So since I work at Concordia University, I'm kind of jealous of people with graduate degrees. I'm planning to get one. Don't have one yet. Were you running throughout? Did you have time to run when you were earning your graduate degree?
Well, no. So that's quite interesting, really. So I just come off the back of finishing the Appalachian Trail. So I just through hiked the Appalachian Trail, which it's 2,200 miles. It starts in Springer Mountain, Georgia, heads up through 14 states in America, all the way up to Mount Katahdin in Maine. And it's the equivalent of walking up and down Mount Everest like 16 and a half times. And I put quite a bit of time pressure on myself to do that challenge. And most people take 4 or 5 months, maybe even 6 months to walk the trail or to through hike the trail. And I ended up doing it in 100 days, so which was pretty rapid, averaging about 22 miles a day. I was solo, I was unsupported, so I was doing my own resupply, but that physically took a massive toll on my body. So when I finished that challenge, I'd lost like all my muscle mass, I'd lost all my strength. I actually struggled to walk after that point. So I finished that in September 2017 and actually then started my master's like a couple of weeks later. So for pretty much the duration of my master's, I wasn't running at all. I was struggling to walk. So I was actually more like in like physio and rehab, trying to build back my strength. And so it was more sort of spending time at the gym. And so I actually stopped running for quite a few years, actually, because I had this this is like, how much detail do you want? I ended up having like a little bit of nerve damage behind my left knee, which has sort of like shortened the nerve. And so I couldn't straighten my left leg properly. And it took maybe about a year to figure this out, see physios and all of this sort of stuff. But when your body is dealing with like a little bit of injury, what can happen is it can start overcompensating in different areas. So because I'd gone over on my left ankle multiple times on the Appalachian Trail, my knee had started to protect the ankle. My knee had started to take over the role of what the ankle does. And then that impacted on like my glutes and my whole like posterior chain. So I was in quite a bit of recovery. And so I didn't really get back into running until actually it was 2021 when I did something called the March Daily Mile. Yeah, I probably peaked after doing the Marathon des Sables in 2016. So yeah, it's been quite a while since I've done sort of any sort of serious distances. I focus now more on sort of strength, and I do quite a lot of like cycling and hiking and those types of things. So the running has taken a back seat.
Let's get into the Marathon des Sables. That is a race comprised of 6 stages over 7 days. Fourth stage is around 50 miles, 80 kilometers. The fifth stage is a full marathon, 26.2, and the sixth is about 9 to 13 miles. Okay. So you're given about, I think, 32. Not only that, like you're given a time limit to complete this race between 32 and 36 hours, I believe. And then let's talk about temperatures, the extreme temperatures, possible daytime highs reaching 125 degrees Fahrenheit, nighttime lows. So I'm really curious what compels someone to put themselves like through that hell, because aside from the fun, it must be torture. It must be hell. No, I mean, why would anyone want to do it? And I'm envious, don't get me wrong, but I'm just curious what makes you tick, basically, that made you want to do that.
Well, a couple of reasons, really. So I started up Tough Girl Challenges, which is my company. It's all about, motivating and inspiring women and girls. It's about sharing these stories. It's about encouraging women and girls to get fit and active, to travel and explore, to live their best lives. And one of the things that I was very conscious of is, we all have these comfort zones. And when you stretch that comfort zone, so for example, when you take running, maybe your first comfort zone is running your first 5K. And then once you've completed your 5K, you push on, you might decide to do the next next challenge, maybe a 10K, then you sign up for a half marathon, then you sign up for a marathon. And as you sort of evolve through these different stages, your comfort zone grows along with you. Now, I'd obviously, I'd at that point been doing a lot of running. And so my comfort zone, I was very comfortable with a marathon distance. I was running it every year, 26.2 miles. It didn't scare me. I knew what work I needed to do. I knew what training I needed to do. I knew what was going to happen to my body at 18 miles, at 20 miles, at 24 miles, at 26 miles. I knew how I was going to feel before, during, and after. I knew that I could do it. I had that internal confidence because I had done it before. And, for me with Tough Girl Challenges, I wanted to launch it onto the scene and sort of prove to everybody that, look, I'm an adventurer. I can challenge myself. I can step outside my comfort zone. So I needed to do something that would give me those butterflies, which would stretch me. And so, I'd done the marathon distance before, but what was next? And I'd heard about this race. And, the first time I heard about it, I had initially the same thoughts as everybody else. But that is crazy. Like, how can you deal with the heat and carrying everything you need on your back? Why would you want to do it? And the more I heard about it, I think that seed got planted in my head, and I started to do more research. And I started to ask myself that question, can I do this? Like, would I be able to do this? Would I be fit enough? Could I get myself strong enough? Would I be able to endure? Would I suffer through these inhospitable environments? And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, yes, let's do this. And then, once I'd signed up for that race, I got those feelings in my stomach that people get when they step outside their comfort zone, because there is nerves and there is excitement. But then this is when it gets interesting, because this is when you start doing your training, that you start doing your preparation, you start doing your running, you start figuring out your kit, your gear, your nutrition, your hydration, pulling all the pieces together. You start thinking about the mental side of the challenge, because it is a mental challenge as well as a physical challenge. And so, it was a couple of reasons I wanted to test myself physically, mentally. I wanted to help launch Tough Girl Challenges. I wanted to prove to other people that I was tough and that I could set myself a big challenge and then go out and achieve it. And it's one of the best things that I've ever done in my life. And I loved it. There were moments when I was out there. I remember this particular moment. It was on the long stage, so running 52 miles, and I was stood. I'd been going for maybe 10, 12 hours, and it was just as the sun was starting to go down, and I was stood at the top of these sand dunes, and I could look out, and all you could see in all directions is just these undulating sand dunes and just desert everywhere. And it was magical. There is something magical about being in the desert. And I remember being stood at the top, and I tightened each strap on my backpack. I took my salt tablets. I took a sip of my sort of tepid and semi-warm water. And I remember thinking to myself, this is what you've trained for. And then I just sort of unleashed, and I just started running downhill, which is obviously fantastic because you're going downhill, you're just sort of going with the flow of the sand dunes. And I just got endorphin rush after endorphin rush, just feeling incredible and amazing. And that memory stays with me. I always think about it, like just thinking of how powerful I felt, how strong I felt, and how ready I was to continue running. I still had probably another 20 miles to go. I mean, it got slightly worse a couple of hours later when it got dark, and then I was like, I hit the wall, and my body and my mind started to argue with itself, and I started to doubt myself and to ask myself stupid questions, why did you think you could do this when your feet hurt, and did you really think you were tough enough and strong enough? And it was that mental battle inside your own mind about, well, can I keep going, and how do you get through the checkpoints, and getting through the checkpoints, and pushing on and seeing a finish line, and knowing that even though it looked like I could touch it, it was actually still probably 2-3 hours away. So incredible highs, incredible lows, but just a phenomenal experience. And if anybody gets the opportunity to go and to do a challenge like this, then I would say grab it, go for it, take advantage of it, and just give yourself permission to just go out there and have fun and enjoy yourself, because it is, don't get me wrong, it's super tough. It is called the toughest foot race on earth, but it really gives you self-confidence and self-belief when you cross that finish line and you get that medal around your neck.
I understand how you can train like the miles and the distance, but what in your training prepared you for the heat? You can't just go to Morocco 4 months before the race and start running in the desert, right?
Well, you could, but what I ended up doing is I'm actually very fortunate. My older brother lives over in Australia, and so I flew out to go stay with him and his family, and they live in Melbourne, right by the beach, and so I headed over in January. So and obviously their sort of December, January, February, March is their summertime. So I was over there during their summer, and Australia were having an incredible heat wave at that point. And by the way, I'm a massive sun person. Like I love the heat, like 30 plus degrees. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit. It makes me super happy. I'm like, give me all the sunshine, give me all the heat. So I was very fortunate that I was training out in Australia during a heat wave. So that was fantastic. So it would come to like 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and everyone else would be indoors in the shade and the air conditioning. And I'd be like, oh, this is brilliant. Let me go out for my run now during the hottest part of the day. But, you know, there are a lot of things that you can do, even if you're UK based, like it, or sorry, not UK based, or if you're not based in a hot country, you know, using things like a sauna, doing things like Bikram yoga, like hot yoga, you know, doing that sort of a, 90-minute routine. The other tips that I've heard people use as well is having a hot bath and also having like a glass of red wine with it. So, you know, there's lots of different things that you can do to try and build up your tolerance to the heat. But using a sauna or doing Bikram yoga 2-3 weeks beforehand is one of the best things. Or if you can, afford to go away somewhere hot in the weeks leading up to it, then that's obviously a little bit of a game changer, because it's super tough going from a very cold environment to a really sort of hot environment if you're not used to those extremes in temperature.
When you started out the race, because not only is it grueling, like if I did hypothetically, the fear in me would be, what if I reached stage 5 and my body broke down right near the end? I mean, did that cross your mind at all, like not finishing and getting so close?
No, not at all. For me, actually just getting to the start of the race was my achievement, because what had actually happened is I'd actually signed up to do the race in 2015 when I started Tough Girl Challenges, and I messed it up. Like I messed up my training, I messed everything up. I massively overtrained, and I wasn't even well enough to get to the start line of the Marathon des Sables in 2015. So you have like you need to get like a doctor's sign off, you need to get like ECGs done, all these things. And I was basically, just before Christmas, I was like bed bound. My weight was falling, period had stopped. I started to get really bad acne on my face and my shoulders. My hair was falling out. My left eye was starting to deteriorate. Like physically, I was in one of the most horrendous places I'd ever been. So I was suffering with like adrenal fatigue and chronic fatigue and all these things from the amount of training that I was doing, because I believed that, the more miles, the better, the more training, the better. My rest days consisted of yoga and swimming, and I was training like, twice a day and having power naps. And yeah, I ended up just completely messing it up. So by the time I got sort of fit, healthy and strong, for me, I wasn't concerned about my body breaking down. I just wanted to get to the start line fit, strong and healthy, which is what I did. So I didn't necessarily, I didn't have those fears. And I think for me, it was more a case of I just wanted to enjoy it. And I think there's a thing when you enter these races where people talk about, are you competing or are you completing? Like, is your goal just to finish the event, or are you competing? You're wanting to get, a top 10, a top 200, whatever placing. And for me, it wasn't about the position. It was just about completing. It was just about doing it for me and being happy and enjoying it and realizing what a privilege it was to be out there in this environment doing something that I'd worked hard for, that I'd trained for, and that I was enjoying. But managing fears, though, this is part of like the mental preparation, like figuring out, well, what are your personal fears before you do the race? Is it that fear of your body breaking down? It's like, and then sort of delving deeper into it. So what aspects of your body are you particularly worried about? Is it your feet? Is it your shoulders? Is it lack of nutrients? Is it not being able to keep food down? Like, really digging into the details to understand what happens to your body in these types of environments, and B, how you can manage that situation. So it's something that I've done a lot of is around that mental side, like, managing fears and putting practical steps in to help sort of alleviate these fears, or to recognize them, acknowledge them, and then be able to move on from them.
Well, despite the attitude that you mentioned, you either complete or compete, despite going in with the completing attitude, you still finished pretty impressively. If you ask me, you were the 9th British woman overall that year, 45th woman out of 159 women. You placed 443rd out of 1,108 competitors. That started with only 973 finished. You completed the race time in 47 hours. Good God, 50 minutes and 46 seconds. That's pretty impressive for AQ. I imagine if you had went in with the goal to compete, I mean, Lord, I mean, I think this is incredible. How you placed.
Oh, thank you. But I think a lot of that came down to the long stage. So for me, I always knew, like, one of my mental strategies was on the long stage. So you actually get, like, you get like 2 days to do it, or 36 hours to do the long stage in. And from all my research and all my preparation, I knew that I wanted to do that race in one, like that stage in one go. I didn't want to stop at a checkpoint. I didn't want to, carry on the following day. I wanted to get to camp as soon as possible. So, you started, I think, at 8:30 in the morning, and I finished at like 1:52 the following morning. And then so I overtook so many people during the long stage, because I was also very tactical about going through checkpoints. So what can happen if you have 5 or 6 checkpoints? You get to a checkpoint and you stop and you fill your water and you have a little chat and you fiddle with your shoes, or you stop and you sit down, and then suddenly it's like 10-15 minutes have gone, which, yeah, in the grand scheme of things isn't a huge amount of time. But if you're doing that 5 or 6, every single checkpoint, you're wasting 20 minutes. That really does accumulate pretty quickly. And so before I got to any checkpoint, mentally, I knew exactly what I needed to do. And I was not hanging around. So I would get to the checkpoint, I'd have the water, I'd undo my bottles. So I was ready to fill my water up. I'd grab my salt tablets, have them. Once my water was in my bottles and I'd finished it and put it in the trash, I was out of there. So my transition through the checkpoints was super quick. There was no messing about. I really psyched myself up before getting to a checkpoint. And even on that long stage, like, the middle of the night, you could have easily stopped and not carried on. And I just thought, no, I have to keep going. And I was the first person in my tent back, and I think maybe 1 or 2 other people joined me that evening. And then other people then were coming in dribs and drabs throughout the rest of the day. And I think that's just even tougher, because not only have they been out in the sun all the day, they slept rough the night before at one of the checkpoints, and then they're in the sun again, continuing on. And so that really sort of massively propelled me forward. But you've got to be wary of something. I don't know if you've ever experienced like goal creep. So you start out initially with your goal, so you're like, I want to complete it. And then when you start doing it, you're thinking, "Ooh, I'm doing pretty well. Maybe I'll aim for a top half or a top 200." And then you change the goals as you go, and that can be quite dangerous, or can affect you mentally when you change your goals, especially if you don't start achieving them. So sometimes you've got to be very clear with your goal, or even set 3 goals. So right, I'm going to set my A goal, which is to complete the race, be happy, be strong, be fit and healthy when I cross the finish line. Maybe having a B goal, I'd like to be in the top half of the race, or maybe having like a C goal, whatever it is, so that you don't suffer with this goal creep as it happens. But yeah, I mean, I'm really pleased with my performance, and I know some other people who've done Marathon des Sables, and they just hated it. It was horrendous. It's the worst thing that they've ever done, they've ever experienced. And for me, like, it's just the opposite. It's one of the best things I've ever done. I loved it. Met amazing people out there. The desert was so stunning and beautiful, and it's amazing to see what your body can do when you train it, and you push yourself to some dark places to carry on through, and to get that medal around your neck.
As if I didn't think this race was crazy enough. This is probably an insignificant detail, but I watched the 1-hour documentary on Fiona Oakes on Amazon, who was also a guest on your podcast, and I think you both ran the same year, if I'm not mistaken. Was that in addition to the 6 days, these 6 marathons, you have the backpack. Now, the backpack, obviously, you don't want to overload, but there's actually a minimum amount of weight that you have to have, right, to once you start out, your bag has to weigh a certain amount, which I thought was crazy. Or is that just normal?
That's actually quite normal for a lot of races. It's to ensure that competitors do have like the amount of correct amount of like calories and food, but also that people aren't reducing weight into and affecting things like their safety. So during this race, and a lot of races now, you do have to have like minimum safety equipment, whether it's, so we had like spot trackers, you had to have like a silver foil blanket, you had to have, I think we had to have money. Like I think you had to have like maybe like 50 or 100 euros, something like that. So you did have to have that minimum weight, that minimum amount of calories and food. So they would check that you had a food for every day and that it was like 2,000 or 3,000 calories in. So I read another lady who was out, I think she was doing like a Himalayan ultra race, and all of her kit and gear was so light. Her pack just came in too light, so they had to give her more weight to make sure that she hit the minimum, which almost seems a little bit unfair, especially if you do have all the gear and the safety equipment, but just because you've got the ultra lighter stuff, which still does the job. But yeah, it's that difficult balance. You want the lightest pack possible, but you want to make sure that you've got all of the equipment and food that you do actually need to complete the race safely.
You mentioned goal creeping before, which I have had. I have run marathons in Spartan Beast, and Spartan Beast takes 7 hours. So even though I've had those goals, my body says, "Oh yeah, here's horrific cramping." So at any time during the race, did you get like cramps in both legs or anything? Where I don't know, maybe your electrolyte level was low, and did you get any cramps at all in your legs or your thighs?
No, so I was okay while I was out moving and while I was out running, because they do give you salt tablets. That's one of the only sort of things that they provide for you. And obviously everybody's different in terms of how much salt you need to consume in relation to how much you sweat. The only time I felt pain, the only time that I thought, oh my God, I need to hit that spot tracker, was after the long stage. So I crossed the finish line, I'd finished, and I felt amazing. And by the time I collected my water and walked to my tent, my body and my mind had realized, oh, we've stopped moving now. Okay, we can let the pain into the body. And oh my God, like the waves of pain and my muscles and everything was hurting. And I was lying on the floor, and there was just no comfortable position because everything was screaming in pain. And it was one of those situations where I didn't know what to do, because there was nothing I could do. Like I couldn't have any more salt, I couldn't have any more water. I'd already eaten food, so I was hydrated, I was fed. It was just the body being in pain. And all I could think of was just go to sleep, just go to sleep. When you wake up in the morning, you're going to be absolutely fine. And I think for those 20-30 minutes trying to get off to sleep, that's when I was just like, I just didn't know what to do. And I felt so bad and horrendous. But I finished the 52 miles, but my body was just not in a good state. But I was also aware I just needed to sleep. It would all be okay in the morning. So get 6 or 7 hours in, and then in the morning it would be a different situation. So yeah, so that was the only point where I felt really horrendous.
Well, on the subject of sleep, that was my next question. For listeners who don't know, you're basically signed tent mates. You're in an open air tent, really. So did you have any trouble sleeping in between stages? Did sleep come easy, or were you too wired to sleep during the 6 days?
It was I was too anxious the night before it started. And I was also one of these really silly ultra light racers. So most people would have like a Thermarest, but Thermarest, the blow up air mattresses, they are actually quite expensive, and I couldn't afford to pay for that at the time. So I had this like really small square bit of foam, which was basically would lay against my go in the back of my backpack and lay against my back to give me a little bit of padding against my gear and equipment. And that's what I would sleep on. And so it was incredibly uncomfortable, like just like it barely covered like my hips and my ribs, and that was horrendous. So I was very jealous of everybody else with like their Thermarest. The only other thing, that it was the cold. Like I really do feel the cold, and so luckily, like because I would finish quite early in comparison to some of the tent mates, I would always sort of end up in the center of the tent. So I'd always have like 2 people next to me, so I could get like the heat and the warmth from those bodies. But I don't think I could have coped if I was on the edge of the tent and having like the cold air sort of whipping down one side of you. But yeah, sleep was just not yeah, not a problem. I think your body gets to this point where it's just like, right, we need to recover, we need to sleep. And so yeah, I slept pretty well actually. Like, yeah, good times.
And meanwhile, while you're sleeping, a sandstorm could have come in out of nowhere, correct?
Oh, absolutely. Like, and they had these, I don't know what they're called, but they're like these little spiky things out in the desert. And so you'd be like, like they do put carpet down, but these carpets and rugs are basically if you drop food on the carpet, you do not eat it. They are covered in probably everything, like animal feces, not human feet, but like, when people like go to the bathroom, maybe don't wash their hands properly, and then they touch the rug, and then you got sandstorms blowing over, and there's just rubbish and dirt, and people's trainers are on it. And so they are pretty nasty basically. So you wanted to be very careful. Like, if you tried not to touch the carpet with your hands. But yeah, like the little nasty spiky things would blow in, and that could be quite annoying. But do you know what? It is what it is. You have a buff, you put the buff down over your eyes or over your mouth, and you just close your eyes, curl up into a little ball, and focus on what you can control. You can't control the weather, you can't control the sandstorm. So yeah, move on, forget about it, do what you can to sleep.
Just so my listeners don't think this is easy. There's no catering table for you. If you want hot tea, like, you have to, what are these things called? Like, you have to make your own fire, basically, a really tiny fire if you want to heat something up. Is that right?
Well, yes, I mean, those are different options, but it just, I mean, you can take a stove with you. Like, you can carry a stove, you can carry a mug, you can take whatever you want
But then the
to make
weight.
it. But exactly, so that's the compromise. So I don't actually drink hot drinks, and to be honest, I don't really cook. So that was never a really big thing for me. But yeah, 100% people did have stoves, or you could make little fires if you wanted to. But one of the things that you do have copious amounts of is like the big 1.5 liter plastic water bottles. So you'd be going through quite a lot of them through the day. And so what you could do is you can cut the water bottles in half, so I had like these not freeze dried, but yeah, like probably freeze dried meals. We put them in, cold soaked it in water, put the other half of the bottle over it and with the lid on, if that makes sense. So filled it with water, and then you can leave that out in the sun, and the sun will sort of like cook and help you to rehydrate your food. So there's stuff like that you can do. You also got like a can of Coke at one point, and so you can make a like little, what do you call it, like a little stove out of a can. You probably have to go on YouTube to Google it. But there's loads of things like that you can do. But it does, it comes down to what luxury items that you want to take and what you're prepared to carry. And I didn't carry a stove or anything like that. But then, I don't drink coffee or tea, so it wasn't like I needed that to start my day.
I could probably talk to you for hours about this race. I'll move on. One thing you wrote that I identified with in your book, and I quote, "Over the years, one of the things I've come to love is proving people wrong." And that always appealed to me too. If someone says I can do something, I'm not that interested. But the moment it's suggested I can't, then something takes over me. So does that go through your mind through any of because not only did you finish the hardest foot race in the world the next year, as you mentioned at the beginning of the interview, you through hiked the Appalachian Trail, and you took 100 days to do this, correct?
Yeah. I think it used to. I think that was probably more of maybe like an insecurity that I had, because I cared what people thought about me. I wanted people to be impressed by me and impressed by what I'd done. And I did want to prove people wrong, especially, for me, I worked in banking previously. So being a female in banking, being in a very male dominated industry, being like a girly girl, if you, if you follow me on Instagram, you'll see that I like the color pink, and, I've got like long hair, and I am feminine. And I think sometimes think that just because you're a girly girl, that you can't go out and do tough stuff and get dirty and get in the sand and get in the mud. And so I used to love proving people wrong. And I think that maybe had a little, to do with my ego. Like, I wanted people to be impressed by me and impressed by what I've done. And that was definitely the case for Marathon des Sables. And I'd say the Appalachian Trail, like, setting myself that big challenge of doing it in 100 days. But I think after the Appalachian Trail, I'd spent a huge amount of time by myself in the woods, having this deep time to reflect and to really, I suppose, get to know me and who I am, and what I love and what I need to work on. And I think after the Appalachian Trail, I got to the point where I didn't care what other people thought, which is a very powerful position to get to when you realize that actually I'm doing this for me. Like it doesn't matter what other people's opinions are of me. It has no bearing on how I view myself. And so I think that's definitely changed over the years, and that's an amazing place to get to, but it definitely didn't happen overnight. So yeah.
When you say you through hike, if you can explain to our listeners what through hiking the Appalachian Trail means.
Yeah, absolutely. So through hiking is when you start at point A. So on the Appalachian Trail, it's we can go north to south or south to north. I started down in Springer Mountain, and you through hike. It just means that you carry on through hiking, walking until you get to the finish. So to the other end of the trail, and so that was Mount Katahdin in Maine. So it's just one long continuous walk that crazy people decide to do, spending weeks and months out in the mountains. But obviously, America has lots of incredible trails, but the three most popular ones are the Appalachian Trail, which is sort of on the East Coast. You've got the Pacific Crest Trail, which is on the West Coast. Then you've got the Continental Trail Divide, which sort of runs down the center. And they all roughly go, I mean, not so much the Appalachian Trail, but the other two go from Mexico to Canada. And the Appalachian Trail is just a little bit shorter, around 2,200 miles.
And if you had to, hypothetical question, if you had to do the Marathon des Sables or the Appalachian Trail again, which one would you pick?
Ooh, that's such a good question. I probably wouldn't do either. And I know,
Okay.
I know that sounds a bit weird, but I really enjoy doing both of them, but there's so many other things that I want to do. And so I wouldn't necessarily repeat it. I mean, Marathon des Sables is a very expensive race to do now. It is, I think it's I'll try and do it in dollars, but it's like £3,500, maybe like $5,000. So it is an expensive race. So the other issue is you train. So I probably trained for well over a year for Marathon des Sables, and then it's over within a week, which I like the journey of the challenge. And so I'd probably be more inclined. No, I wouldn't do the Appalachian Trail again. This is a weird answer. I'm going back and forth. I love the Appalachian Trail. It was amazing, but I also suffered a little bit with claustrophobia afterwards, because you spend a lot. So it's also, the Appalachian Trail is also known as the Green Tunnel. So you're spending a lot of time under trees, walking through forests, and walking in the woods. And it can get, I found it definitely towards the end, like quite claustrophobic. And so I went through a stage of not wanting to spend time in woods or be outdoors or be in enclosed like spaces, because I felt too enclosed and trapped doing it, which is quite weird. And so I'd want to do something. I'd do another trail. Like I'd love to do the Pacific Crest Trail. Like that would be absolutely amazing. That was probably a little bit of a yes, a little bit of a no. Like I wouldn't do either of them again. I'd take the money that I'd spend on Marathon des Sables and go and do like another through hike, a longer through hike, but not time pressured.
On the Appalachian Trail, can you go a day or two without seeing anyone?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So in some of the more remote places you can, but it's an incredibly popular trail, and there's lots of like day hikers, and you can smell day hikers coming, because as a through hiker, you very rarely shower or wash your clothes. And so I probably smelt quite funky. But what's weird is you can smell like people's washing powder and perfume, or even sometimes like the food from quite far away. Sorry, what was the question you asked me? I just went off on a tangent.
No, that was it. No, I was just curious if you could go a day or two without seeing anyone on the trail, and if that's lonely at all.
Not really. Is it? No, but I think this does depend on the individual. So I like spending time by myself. I really enjoy my own company, and I'm one of these people. I've only just figured out sort of relatively recently. Like I'm very extroverted, but I'm also very introverted. So I'm happy to talk to anyone, go anywhere by myself. It's literally like not an issue. I will just carry on and chat. But then I also need this like downtime, and so for me, I found it incredibly therapeutic being able to walk and think and reflect and just have this amazing quality time with myself. And not everybody's going to be like that, because I think sometimes it can pull up maybe dark thoughts or dark experiences or past traumas that you've had and you need to process. And sometimes it's not good for people to be by themselves. But I do think that it is a skill that if you can get comfortable with who you are, it's incredibly powerful. So I never felt lonely, like on that experience. But it is also, through hiking, there's this culture, there's these incredible people that you meet. There are, a lot of people band together and create like trail families. People are friendly and welcoming, and even, when you go stay in a hostel, you'll have, connections with other people, or when you go through town. So you do get social interactions.
And if that weren't enough, the following year in 2018, you decide to cycle over 4,000 kilometers, the Pacific Coast Highway, PCH, from Vancouver to Cabo. Approximately how long did it take you to do that?
So I started on September 10th and I flew out of Cabo sometime in December, so probably late December. But so there was no real time pressure. You could do it a lot faster than I did. So with my route down, definitely on the Pacific Coast Highway, you could probably do that in 4 or 5 weeks maybe. And then the second part of my journey was when I crossed over into Mexico. What I originally decided to do was to do the off-road section, like on the Baja Divide, but that basically ended up getting completely messed up and I had to go back onto the road. So I did finish it a lot quicker. So I maybe had like a week in Cabo at the end, which was a pretty nice thing to do, just to recharge and relax sort of on the journey. But the reason I ended up doing a cycling challenge was, so I'd finished my master's at that point, so I'd handed in my dissertation, but I was still struggling with like walking, and to be honest, I was over hiking at that point. I was like, no, never want to put on another backpack, and I didn't want to sort of damage my body further. But the one thing that I could do, which didn't impact on my knee, was cycling. And so that's why the Pacific Coast Highway was just sort of the perfect thing. And plus the other thing, it was on the coast. It was these big, wide open spaces, being next to an ocean, which is what I needed. So it was almost like the opposite of the Appalachian Trail. So, I wasn't hiking and I wasn't like enclosed in the woods. I was out by the ocean and on a bike. But yeah, and I mean, an incredible experience, and again, an amazing opportunity. I flew over, ended up spending like a week in Vancouver. A friend came over to join me for that first week, visited like a secondhand bicycle shop, sort of walked in. I was like, hey, I'm going to be cycling the Pacific Coast Highway. Do you have a bike that I can ride? What options do you have? They were like, how much money have you got? And I was like, not a lot. So he sort of showed me like one corner of the room where these sort of like these rusty secondhand bikes were, and I was like, perfect, that'll do. So he fixed up a bike for me, bought myself some panniers, and then packed up and headed on down Vancouver. I'd never cycled before properly. I'd never done like an overnight camping trip with the bike. Obviously I'd done a lot of camping previously. I was still pretty rusty. Like, did I know how to change a tire? Probably not. I don't think I did change a tire on my way down. But a beautiful way to see that part of the world. Like, really, really recommend it. A stunning cycle.
And hope everyone was nice to you in Canada.
I'm just like trying to think. Like, yeah, everyone was lovely, super lovely.
Oh, good. Well, I think in 2019 you got your legs back, because then you decided to walk the Camino Portuguese, which is roughly 675 kilometers from Portugal to Spain. Okay, how long did that take?
That was probably like 4 or 5 weeks, but that was quite an interesting story of how it came about, because I had quite a lot of time at home, and basically the months before that, I'd finally been at home for enough time to work with like the physio. And so I was working with a physio, with a PT, to sort out like my knee, because my knee, I'd been to the doctors, I'd had like scans done, and I was really, really starting to get very concerned about it. And anyway, this physio was amazing, fixed my knee, and I finally was like, oh my God, I can squat, I can bend my leg, like this is pretty epic. And I've been speaking to a girl called Kat Davis, and she'd been a guest on mine on the Tough Girl podcast previously. She was like a big hiker, and she just released this guidebook called the Camino Portuguese. And I knew the guidebook company company because I'd interviewed like quite a few of their authors. And it was just one of these really, do you know when sometimes you're just feeling cheeky? And my backpack had actually, what I'd done is I lost so much weight on the Appalachian Trail. So, you know, in your hip belt, you have to keep tightening up your hip belt. And I just kept cutting off the straps. And so basically there was like no straps on the hip belt because I was just very, very thin at the end. And when when I got back to like my normal size, the hip belt didn't work anymore because I needed new straps. And so I was quite cheeky, and I think I'd reached out to Osprey and it's like, oh, you know, is it possible to get this replaced? And they came back and replaced my pack, and then they ended up sending me like this new backpack. And then I just thought, well, why don't I just ask like Cicero and the guidebook company? So I just sent them this email saying, look, would you be interested in doing a sponsored hike? This is what I do. I'd really love to share the journey, share it on the social media, film it, vlog it. And they came back, they were really positive. So this was sort of like my first like sponsored opportunity, which was, you know, incredible. So one of the things that I like to do is sort of start challenges around my birthday, which is September 10th. And that's what I did. So I had a couple of days in Lisbon and then started walking on the Camino and following these yellow arrows, which point you in the direction to head all the way up to, oh my God, I'm going to forget the name, Santiago de Compostela, all the way up in Spain. And you know, it was a really stunning, beautiful journey. Great weather at that time of year, not massively busy when you do it in September, October. Again, you get to meet lots of other pilgrims. There are these wonderful places to stay called alberges, which are very, very cheap, like €5 or €6. So it's a very reasonably priced experience to go on. Plus, because you can stay in the alberges, you don't need to carry a tent. You don't need to carry like your thermarest or your. I think I did take my sleeping bag, but you know, you can do it quite lightweight, and you're always going through lots of towns and villages, lots of little cafes, lots of places to stop for lunch. So you know, you weren't isolated like you were on, for example, like the Appalachian Trail. So it was easy to get resupply. You weren't needing to carry that much. So it was almost like a very civilized way to get back into hiking, because I was still very, very nervous about my left knee. Would it be able to cope carrying a backpack again? And it did. It coped super well, and it was, you know, it was beautiful passing through, you know, World Heritage sites and seeing like the Templar Castle in Tomar and visiting like the old towns of Porto and Santiago and incredible like Roman ruins, and there was these ancient bridges and fabulous beaches. So yeah, it was just wonderful how that opportunity came about, really.
Considering all the time that you've spent outdoors, you know, the weeks and months, I was just curious if you ever had any close or scary encounters with an animal.
Oh, bears and snakes.
Okay.
The bears on the apple, I still remember it because there was this beautiful, gorgeous, like brown, fluffy, like a big old, like, well, a little like cute little teddy bear, because it was a baby bear, ran in front of me. And I still remember the first thought that went through my head was like, oh my God, that is just like the cutest. Like, I'm so lucky to have seen this little baby bear.
Wait, that was your first thought?
That was my first thought, followed
Uh-oh.
by a split second later when it was like, hold on, where's Mama Bear? And then it was like, oh my God, head up, look around. And I could see Mama Bear was like maybe like 20 meters ahead of me. And then I spotted another baby bear. So there's two cubs and the mum. And the two cubs were like climbing like this. So after that, the little bear ran in front of me, ran up to the mum, and they started climbing a tree. And I was just like, so I had my poles, and I started just banging on my poles and walking backwards and just banging on my poles, making noise. But I suppose I'm quite relaxed I try to be quite relaxed, because I try and remember, look, you know, this is their environment. I'm walking in their space. So they are doing their thing, living their best lives. I'll try not to intrude. I mean, obviously, the other animals that you encounter are things like mice, which are just awful when they're running all over you. Mosquitoes, little biting flies, like they are just horrendous. Yeah, but otherwise, I think that's about it. Like a snake, but that was fine. I did film me running past it, which is actually quite amusing if you find that episode on my vlog, because it's like I would go to the left and the snake would go to the left, and I'd be like, oh no, and then I'd go to the right and the snake would go to the right, and you're just like, you know, sometimes you just can't handle it. And I do remember I was sat at a shelter, I just arrived, sat at a shelter, I'd sat down, I still had my pack on, And I just, I was just like taking a couple of breaths, having some water, and something fell from the roof. And I looked down. Ugh, it makes me gag now. And it was like a baby mouse, which was like dead. It was just, it was awful. And so I thought, right, I'm definitely not staying there. And that's why I quite like camping in my tent.
And at the end of 2019, you finished out the year by walking is it pronounced Lycian Way in Turkey?
Yeah, the Lycian Way. So the girl who wrote the Camino Portuguese, Kat Davis, she invited me out. We've been in contact through WhatsApp. She was also on a Camino. We were hoping to meet up, and I'd been really organized with my podcast. So I have podcasts coming out every Tuesday and Thursday, but I preload a lot of my content. And I preloaded all my content. I had like one speaking gig I needed to do. And then I was free basically until the end of the year. And Kat had reached out and said, oh, look, would you fancy walking the Lycian Way in Turkey? And my first thought was, well, yes, obviously I want to go and walk. It sounds amazing. My second thought was, I've never heard of the Lycian Way. I need to go and Google it to see where it is, to see what's involved. So it's based over in southern Turkey from Fethiye to Antalya. It's around 509 kilometers. It's around roughly a 29-day walk, but we ended up doing like 23, 24 days. And it has been named by the Sunday Times as one of the world's or one of the top 10 most beautiful long distance hikes in the world. And, it was absolutely beautiful, really hard going. Like, I'm pleased I'd done the Camino before, so I had like my hiking legs on, because if I'd gone straight to that, it would have been brutal. But because I've been wearing a pack for 6 weeks, it was really great. But again, by the coast, incredible views. I mean, a lot more complicated on the navigation. It wasn't quite as well waymarked as the Camino routes were, but just this incredible opportunity. And Cicero didn't actually have a guidebook on the Lycian Way, but I reached out to another company I'd worked with previously called Commute, and then there was also another company called Waterwell, and both wanted to sponsor and get involved, which is obviously super amazing, because that way at least your costs are being covered and you're able to make a little bit of money from being on that experience. So I've vlogged that experience as well, heading out to Turkey, what it was like being out there, some of the different sites that we saw. And actually one of the highlights, I don't know if you've heard of this, have you heard of Rosie Swale Pope? No. Oh, well, let me tell you about Rosie. So Rosie Swale Pope is this incredible woman. She's now 75, but when I met her, she was 73 or 74 years young, and she was running from Brighton in the UK over to Nepal. Kathmandu, Nepal, and she was actually at Istanbul, and we were getting our flight out of Istanbul. And so we managed to meet up with Rosie Swale Pope, who previously in her 50s had run around the world. It'd taken her 5 years. So an absolute hero, an absolute legend. She's got an amazing book as well called My Little Run Around the World. So, so the end of that trip was meeting up with Rosie. So yeah, it was really, really beautiful. A perfect way to spend. I think we were out there for maybe 3-4 weeks, something like that. So yeah, just again, sort of an incredible experience. It was amazing to head out to Turkey. I'd never been to Turkey before. Spend time in Istanbul, spend time with Kat, meet Rosie, and visit like some of these ruins. So you'd be up climbing these mountains, and there'd be some pretty big scrambles, and then you just come across like these like amphitheaters or these old tombs, stuff which in the UK or America would be like fenced off and protected, but in Turkey they haven't quite got around to that. So you just be like through hiking, and there'd just be these sites which you just honestly can't believe. So yeah, it was beautiful. It was really, really stunning hike.
Yeah, I spent a year working in Turkey. I had never heard of the Lycian Way, but your videos when I watched, because you vlogged a lot of that trail, made me homesick, because Turkey is so beautiful. Yeah, and like you said, you can just touch the ruins. These beautiful Roman amphitheaters are out there. So yeah, I really enjoyed your videos on Turkey, because it made me miss it even more, that country.
Oh, thank you.
And then in 2020, wow, okay. Well, I'm also a big fan of Australia. I worked for a year in Australia, so I never got to get over to Tasmania, but you got to walk the overland track. That one I had heard of, so I'm very jealous. If you can tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So like I mentioned earlier, so my brother lives in Melbourne, and he's got he's married with 2 children, and because of what I do, I can work anywhere in the world as long as I have my laptop. And I'm not good in the cold weather, so I try and spend at least 3 months of the year over in Australia. I'm very fortunate. I get to live with my brother. I don't need to pay rent. I don't need to pay for food. I will help obviously look after the children and walk the dogs. And Cicero the guidebook company that I worked with previously, they were launching into the sort of Australian market with their overland track book. And obviously I was over there, and the perfect time to walk the overland track is like, February or January, February, March time. And it was just one of those things. And my largest audience is America, UK, then America, and then Australia. And so it just worked out really well because I've got, a large Australian following. And so they sent me the guidebook. We agreed that I would go and do the hike, follow the guidebook and vlog it and share it. So again, like another sponsored hike. And it was just, an incredible walk, very, very different from all of the other walks that I've done, because you are walking through, it's very controlled, I would say, because you can't wild camp when you're out there. You've got to stay in set accommodation. You need to book a time slot. So they have so many people starting every day. You have to, now I'm trying to remember if you have to pay for, I think you do have to pay for your ticket during certain parts of the year, especially when it's busy. They do have rangers out there as well checking on you, because the weather can be quite volatile over there. But I mean, beautiful boardwalks, incredible animals, these amazing little offshoots and different walks that you can do. Just breathtaking. There's also, you asked me about animals. I also remember the leech. So I think I was walking in February 14th. And the reason I remember that is because people had told me about these leeches and you had to be careful. And I was walking along and I felt something like just something on my ankle, which just felt like a little bit funny. And I remember looking down and there's this great big black leech sucking attached to my skin, having a whale of a time. And it's just it's just awful. And you've got to be quite careful how you get leeches off. Like you don't just like pull them off. You've got to you have to burn them off. I'm trying to remember how I got the leech off. I think, did I burn them off? Or no, sorry, I didn't burn it off, because actually I couldn't do that to a leech. Basically, you wait until they get full and then they'll fall off. So you just let the leech continue sucking, which is what I did. And then I felt like it sort of drop off my ankle, and then I bent down and like picked it out of my shoe and like threw it away. But yeah, absolutely stunning to hike the overland track. I mean, really beautiful, amazing weather, incredible mountains, incredible people, beautiful waterfalls to walk past as well. The path is very well trodden. Sometimes it's not a path, it's a lot of wooden footbridges, like the planks that you walk on, but very, very stunning scenery. And what was really nice at the end was there's like a big lake, and most people, I actually walked around the lake, but you can also get like a little ferry, so you can sort of miss out like the final 5 or 6 miles or so. I didn't. I carried on. I walked the full way. But yeah, highly recommend if you're out in that neck of the woods to go and hike the overland track, or if you want to see more about it, then I have vlogged it as well. So well worth watching those vlogs. I think there's only like 9 or 10 of them. Yeah, 10 vlogs.
Yes. Oh yeah, we'll definitely be posting all the links, and I highly encourage the listeners to check out her videos. Plus, you're also very funny too, I find.
Thank you.
So, since part of this podcast dabbles in travel and tourism, I realized that you worked as a chalet host in Switzerland for 6 months. So I have no idea what that is, but I'm sure my listeners would love to know what is a chalet host.
What is a chalet host? Great question. So chalet hosting it's when you go and spend 6 months out in the mountains. You work incredibly long hours. You do cooking. You basically do all the cooking and all the cleaning. And in return for that, you end up getting a ski pass for the season, which are generally pretty expensive. And you get your food and accommodation and everything paid for. So it means that you can spend like 6 months in the mountains and get to ski all the time and hang out and have an awesome time. But it does mean that you only get 1 day off a week, and that you are cooking. So I was cooking, like full English breakfast every day, making a cake, afternoon tea, and whipping up 3-course meals in the evening and dessert as well. So it's pretty full on. You're sort of like you're like a hostess, so you're entertaining everybody in the evenings, and then you could obviously go off and party and carry on. But I basically decided, so after I left my corporate job, I spent quite a bit of time over in South America and Australia, and I went to Africa and climbed Kilimanjaro. But I knew I wanted to get a little bit better at skiing, and I wasn't going to get better at skiing by just going on like a 1-week ski holiday every year. I needed to really commit to taking the time out. But equally, to spend 6 months skiing in Switzerland and Verbier is hugely expensive, and so I couldn't afford to do that. And so what I did instead was getting this job as a chalet host, which meant that my accommodation's paid for, my ski pass, my ski hire, that's all covered. And in return, I just need to do this cooking and cleaning. So I was probably one of the oldest chalet hosts at like 32, and I was with all these sort of 19-year-old girls who were also sort of chalet hosting. And to be honest, we had an absolute blast. I mean, but it's such hard work. Like, I mean, and it's really put me off cooking ever since. And I was gonna say, and cleaning. I mean, obviously I do clean, but probably not as much as I had to when I was chalet hosting and looking after 10 people all the time. But it's just it's a great way to travel and to see parts of the world and not have to pay for it, to actually earn some money while you're doing it. You don't earn a lot, but you'll earn sort of pocket money enough to pay for a few drinks and a few night outs here and there.
That sounds very similar to Club Med.
Yeah, well, actually, a lot
Alps.
of people do. Yeah, they do like the season. So they'll do the winter season, and then they'll head down to the Med and do like the summer season. But it's not something that I wanted to continue doing. But it's a great experience, and I definitely recommend people, if they have the time, to go and do it at some point.
Well, I definitely recommend to my listeners to check out your podcast, the Tough Girl Podcast, if you really want to listen to inspirational women and their stories. It's amazing. Don't worry, I'm posting all the links, and especially your YouTube channel. So, Sarah Williams, well, I cannot thank you enough for coming on. This has been very special for me. I really thank you.
Oh no, thank you so much. Thank you for having me on, allowing me to chat about my loves and my passions and my interests. And I hope it's inspired your listeners to think about what their next challenge could be, their next adventure could be, and hopefully take their first step towards going after it and achieving their dreams.
Thank you so much. Well said, well put. Everyone, that was Sarah Williams. I want to thank you once again, and we'll see you all next week. Bye.